Thank you all for coming out on this beautiful sunny morning, a little icy roads. This week I went to see a movie by myself. I haven't done that in a long, long time, and I didn't have to share the popcorn. It was so... But I went to see a movie called Origin. Has anyone seen it? One person has seen it. It was fantastic, and I highly recommend it. It's a dramatization based on a nonfiction book called Caste. Maybe some of you have read that book, Caste, by Isabel I'm going to say her name wrong, Wilkerson. It came out in 2020, and in August of 2020, and in November became a bestseller in New York Times and stayed there on that list for 58 weeks.
It is a fabulous book.
Sorry?
It's a fabulous.
Sad book? Fabulous book, and sad, depending on how you're looking at it, is a fabulous book. And the author, who's a Pulitzer Prize winner, by the way, for journalism in 1994, first black woman to win the award, wanted to show how we devalue people. And everyone she talked to kept saying, going back to racism. And she said, it's not about race. She was comparing it to the way the Jews were treated during the Nazi regime, and how the untouchables are treated in India, the Dalits treated in India, who were all of the same race. It's just that in America, the people that we put in those boxes, we cast them as being less value than us, is seen on the outside. And so she brought all this together, and it was an amazing movie. And she invites us to look at our own biases with this. Where do we do that? Where do we put people in a box and say they're not as valuable as we are? It's a hard thing to look at yourself and see, because we all have biases. We all have some of that. When we actively look within and challenge those biases, we can tap into inner resources of strength, inner resources of confidence, and heal those biases, come into more of a place of oneness. We can take heart. And I love what Merriam-Webster dictionary says. Take heart means to gain courage or confidence, to begin to feel hopeful about the future. An example that they use right in the dictionary is a quote from Nicholas B. Dirks, who is an academician and an author, and he says, movements against any form of repression can take heart from a historical method that demonstrates that much of what has been produced by history can also be dismantled. We saw the dismantling of that with the Nazis in the way the Jews were treated. And we can learn from the mistakes of the past. We can see our mistakes as stepping stones along the journey of our life and allow ourselves to heal those and create a world that works for all. So Black History Month is in February, and it's been the month of Black History in February since 1976, every president has declared February Black History Month. And in Canada and the UK, they also celebrate a month to celebrate Black history. Reverend Jackie Hawkins, who's a Unity minister in California, says history helps us to understand who we are. It helps us to better understand ourselves. And Black history is especially important because we need to understand America as a collective. And this history tells a story of Black life experiences. And the contributions to this country are rich. They're complex. They're diverse. They're multi-ethnic. This beautiful, complex mosaic is significant. It's important that we look at and honor the Black history. It bears repeating, it bears celebrating. In unity, our first principle is there is one power, one presence in the world, God or Spirit, and it's all powerful, omnipresence. Well, this power is diverse and inclusive, and it resides in each of us. And so for us to understand who we are, the story must include all of us, even those people that we may put in a box. And that's why Black History Month is so important. And it's important to celebrate it because we can learn a lot from Black history. It unites us. It allows us to celebrate the differences between us and celebrate our similarities. We better understand Black history when we look at our own stories. It helps us to look at our own stories. And it reminds us to dig deeper and think deeper about who we are and who we want to be. In the movie Origin and in the book Cast, Isabel talks about a situation where her husband had died and she lives in an old house. And the basement had flooded, and she had never gone down into the basement because that was her husband's job to go in the basement. My husband's job to go in our crawl space. And it was flooded, and so she had a repairman come out. And the repairman, when she opened the door, was a little shocked to see a Black woman in this white neighborhood, mostly white neighborhood. And he didn't want anything to do with this. He went down into the basement with her, but as she's talking about what happened and trying to figure out where the water's coming from and how it can drain, and she's trying to move things around, he's just standing there. And she said, my husband died in the last few months, and he was always the one to come down here, so I don't even know where the drain is. I don't know if the sump pump is broken. I don't know what it is, and he's just staring at her and not saying anything and not helping her. And she just sits down and she looks at him and she says, my mom died last week. Do you have a mom still alive? And he says, no, my mom died, whenever, some while back. And she said, yeah, it's really hard to lose a mom. And then she said, do you have a dad that's still alive? And he said, yeah, but he's mean. And she said, well, it's good to have a parent that's still on the planet with you. And they start talking about their parents. They start talking about their family. And she gets him to talk about his life. And he, as he's talking about his life, starts seeing her as a person. And he gets out his flashlight, which he hadn't done before. And he says, let me look around here. Let me move some things for you. Let me find out what the problem is. You see, when we hear somebody's story and when we share our story, people become our equals and we can have compassion. And that's what happened in this situation. He found the problem. He offered to fix it for her. And it was beautiful. And so I want to share with you some stories of some Black Americans that you may not have heard of. We talk a lot about the ones we have heard of, Rosa Parks and Nelson Mandela and Martin Luther King Jr. and so many others. But these are some you probably haven't heard of. Ayana Nahuma was a 7-year-old Black girl who participated in the first sit-in in a Cott's drugstore in Oklahoma City, 2 years before the famous sit-ins in Greensboro, North Carolina, where the college students sat at the drug counter to get served. She had taken a trip to New York City with the NAACP Youth Council. And while she was in New York, she saw Black and white people checking into the same hotel. She saw them sitting down at a counter in a restaurant eating together. And these kids were amazed because this didn't happen in Oklahoma City. And so they decided as a group that they wanted to do that when they got home. And so the NAACP said, well, we need to train you. We need to prepare you for this. We're willing to do this. And so they had kind of a boot camp for the kids. And some of the parents didn't want their kids to participate because they were afraid it might get ugly, violent. But they thought, children, it's not going to be violent because it's children. And so Ayana's mom decided she would be a volunteer and she would drive the kids. So 13 kids, Ayana, who is 7, and her 5-year-old sister, wearing cute little white dresses, and 13 other kids sat at the counter at the Katz drugstore that first day when they opened and said, may we have hamburgers and Cokes. The waitresses were angry. They didn't want to serve them. They didn't serve them. The customers were angry. People were upset. The kids sat there all day, never got served. They waited till it was closed, and then they left. The next day, same thing. The kids heard the N-word. People were angry. They stayed all day, never got served, left when the store closed. The third day, they said, may we have hamburgers and Cokes, please? And the waitresses said yes. Yeah, and the thing about the Katz drugstore is that they were in several states. They were in Arkansas, Missouri, and Kansas. And they opened all their stores, all their lunch counters to the African American people because of that. This group of kids continued to sit at many counters in restaurants for the next 7 years until 1964 when the Civil Rights Act was passed. It may have seemed that they were asking for a hamburger and Coke, but they were really asking for dignity and respect. And they got it. And they knew their value regardless of their young age. They took heart. They took heart. Farrell Duncombe was a young boy whose father was a preacher and his mom was in the choir, and his Sunday school teacher was Rosa Parks. Before Rosa Parks became Rosa Parks, before the bus boycott. They called her Miss Rosalie, and she called him Little Farrell. Later, years later, when Farrell became a principal of a high school at Lanier High School, he heard Rosa Parks was coming back to town, to his town, and he called her up to see if she would come to the school. She was coming back to commemorate the civil rights movement. And he called her up, and she says, Farrell, is that you? And he said, yes, ma'am. You're a principal now? Yes, ma'am. Of a school? Yes, ma'am. She said, Lord, I'm so happy because I ain't think you was going to be nothing. He said, quite the thing getting called out by the mother of the civil rights movement. But she came and walked into that school on his arm, a mostly white school, and it brought tears to his eyes. The pictures that's still on his desk, humbled that she would be there with him and share that moment with him in front of the whole student body. Years later, he decided to become a preacher like his father and went back to that same church where Miss Rosalie was his Sunday school teacher. He took heart. Nelva Williamson grew up in one of the only black families in their small town, where her mother spent 52 years as a teacher. But Nelva didn't think she'd end up in the classroom. When she was in grammar school, she wanted to read the high school books. And the librarian said, no, you got to read the grammar school books first. Then you can read the middle school books. and then you can read the high school books. She said she put herself through all that to read all those books, and just so she could read Lord of the Rings. When she was 11, Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated, and she wanted to read all she could, to learn all she could about him and about Black history to prove her worth as a Black girl. When she grew up, she thought she would teach for a few years to save up some money so she could go to law school. She wanted to be a lawyer. And when she was reading a big, thick law book, one of her sixth grade students came up to her and said, "What is that?" And Nelva said, "It's a law book." And the sixth grader said, "Why are you reading that? You are a teacher. You're not going to be a lawyer. You're a teacher." That little girl ended up being a lawyer. And Nelva found her passion for teaching. She continued teaching and living in Houston, teaching topics she wasn't supposed to teach, and having her students say, "We never heard about Juneteenth before." She had the courage to teach about Juneteenth. She took heart. Reverend Sherry Taylor Jones has a dream that one day we won't need Black History Month, that it becomes obsolete when all races, all creeds, all colors are given equal place, equal importance in our history, and we just have our U.S. history. She says, "When I look at you, I can only see God." What would that be like if when we looked at each other, that's all we saw? Anyone, we saw God. That's Unity's second principle, that each of us are divine beings. Each of us have that same amount of potential, the same amount of value. What if we saw that in each other when we looked at each other? Instead of seeing our differences, instead of seeing where we don't agree on things. After George Floyd's murder, I wanted to learn as much as I could about racism, about Black history, and I started reading books. White Fragility was the first one. That was a hard book to read. The World Between Me, was it The World Between the World and Me? Just Mercy, so you want to talk about race. Some of the books that I read that summer. When Caste came out in August of 2020, and then it became a bestseller, a lot of people were talking about the book. People have read it, right? Some of you have read it. And everybody was telling me, so I bought it. And when I had finished the last book I had read, I needed a break. And when I look back on that, I think about how privileged I am that I can take a break from learning about this racism in our country, our Black history here. That's my privilege. As a white person, I can set it down. It's not the privilege of people of color in our country to be able to set that down. It's really eye-opening to me when I saw that, when I realized that about myself. Isabel Wilkerson says in Caste, "None of us choose the circumstances of our birth. We had nothing to do with having been born into privilege or under stigma. We have everything to do with what we do with our God-given talents and how we treat others in our species from this day forward. We are not personally responsible for what people who look like us did centuries ago, but we are responsible for what good or ill we do to people alive with us today. We are responsible for our own ignorance, or with time and open-hearted enlightenment, our own wisdom." That's what we're responsible for. How we treat people today. I've been facilitating Atlas of the Heart. We've had 2 sessions so far. And it's based on Brené Brown's book, Atlas of the Heart, and her series on Max, that's streaming on Max. And I love how she talks about empathy, because it's not the empathy that we grew up with. It's not the definition of empathy that most of us know. She says, most of us grew up or learning about empathy as putting ourselves in someone else's shoes. And she says, we can't really do that. We can't really put ourselves in someone else's shoes, because as much as we can feel and think we understand and have compassion for and want to be an ally, we as white people are not in a black person's shoes and never will be. We can't be in their shoes. We don't have their backstory. We don't have their experiences. But what we can do, and what we're encouraged to do and invited to do, to have empathy for someone, is to truly listen and believe them when they share what their experience is. Don't make them try to defend it. Just believe them that this was their experience. It's a beautiful way of looking at empathy, to just this holy listening. Just listen with your whole heart. So if you're willing to listen and open your heart and expand your consciousness and see where your own biases might be, there's a lot we can learn about ourselves. There's a lot we can do to make this world a better place, to expand our views on things. There are ways we can honor Black History Month. We can educate ourselves on Black history in our community. We can visit a Black or an African American museum. We can learn about Black music history. We can read books written by Black authors, watch films or videos by Black creators, support Black-owned businesses, support influential Black-led nonprofits. There's so much we can do. And not just in February. We have 1 month where we focus on it, but it should be a lifelong process of trying to learn and integrate and be this beautiful, diverse country that we are, accepting everyone. Accepting everyone. Martin Luther King Jr. says, our very survival depends on our ability to stay awake, to adjust to new ideas, to remain vigilant, and to face the challenge of change. Face the challenge of change. This Wednesday is Valentine's Day, which is a day of love. Have enough self-love for yourself and love for humanity to focus on Black History Month. It's also Ash Wednesday, which is the first day of Lent. Maybe give up some bias that you know you have. We like to give up things for Lent. Begin this 40-day period of Lent with that. In preparation for Easter of new life. Inviting us to take heart and accept the challenge of change. There's enormous love when we allow that, when we come to a place where we realize that we are all created equal, with the same amount of value, the same amount of potential, the same amount of goodness in everyone. So look at each other and see God. Namaste.